been an interesting week. You guys have wished for this heat, and it is here. You know it's gonna. I'm just letting you know it's gonna be mentioned every week. It rained, and that was nice, but it's hot, and it's hot today. Ooh, that's big. We're gonna see some people freaking out. Oh, Clayton's the first to leave. Look at that. I'm just telling you, if that thing comes close to me, I'm out the door. I'm not even gonna lie, because it flutters. It's not just gonna land. I don't care what it is. Isn't there someone on staff to handle these things? What's going on here? There's my brave 6-foot-tall son. He's going to the last possible seat. That's fantastic. All right. Well, yes, it's hot. And we're here, and that thing is here too. And it's going to be okay. If it lands on my neck, I will seriously freak out. But, all right. Yeah, so let's get on with this and ignore that thing back there. It's one of God's lovely creatures, and I'm sure it does not mean us any harm. So we're not going to worry about it. Yes, what was I talking about? It's hot. And it's humid already. Isn't that fun?
Yep.
No?
Nope.
Wrong answer, see? It's a good thing we're doing a quiz. Yeah, okay, let's kind of recap and see where we were and where we're going today. So we've been talking, as we're working through Hebrews, we touched on this concept of running, right? In chapter 12, we hit these themes of running. And running the race of faith with style, and with flair, and with Anna?
Panache.
Yes, with panache. And when we were talking about this idea of running the race in faith, running the race of faith in style, we're not talking about a vanity like, look at me, look how good I look, but instead, look at the gospel. Look at how beautiful the gospel makes me look. Look at how beautiful the gospel makes my life, so that when there are challenges, when there's difficulties, when there's pitfalls, I'm not completely falling apart. And people aren't seeing me fall apart, but instead, they're seeing me address or face a challenge with style because of the gospel, not because of me. And so we talked about this aspect of how the gospel should make our life look, how we deal with circumstances that we're faced with, challenges. And we were told to run this race with faith. But the way to do that, we have to consider the life of faith the same way a runner considers a marathon. We have to first shed ourselves of the things that hold us, weigh us down. And for the Christian, we first address sin. Sin is like a heavy weight. If you're a marathon runner, you want to be as lean as possible, but then you also want to wear clothing that helps you in the run. And so if you have loose, baggy, heavy clothing, you want to take those off and put on the appropriate things. And that's what the author of Hebrews is telling us. When you run the race, set aside the things that weigh you down. Things like sin. Specifically, we saw that in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. So we are to set that aside, and we are to run with endurance. And we do that by focusing on the author and the perfecter of our faith, which is Jesus Christ. Verse 2 told us to look to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. When we struggle, when life gets too overwhelming, when we think there is no possibility of making it through another day, we look toward Christ, which is where we're supposed to be looking all the time. And if you're looking at Jesus, and you see him seated on the right hand of the Father, seated on the throne, and you're reminded that he, with joy, endured the cross on our behalf. Look, let's be really honest. Whatever you're going through is nothing compared to what Christ endured for you because of the joy that he saw. And so when we're going through life, and it is a challenge, and it is difficult, and there's decisions to make, and we don't know what's going to happen, and, whatever it could be, a health diagnosis, you got cancer, you just lost your job, your husband of 20 years decided he no longer wants to be married, your kids have walked away from the faith. Look toward Christ. Christ will deal with all those situations. Maybe not the way you want to. Maybe not the way you want him to. Maybe not the way you hope. But he will deal with them. And we focus on him and the joy that he saw in enduring the cross on our behalf. And so we got to this race idea, running this race. And then Clayton, a few weeks ago, preached on discipline. And what a good thing discipline is, which we never think of. No one ever thinks, hey, this is fantastic. Thanks for correcting me, pal. Or, Dad, I appreciate you yelling at me and setting me straight. Thank you. Or, friend, thank you for confronting the sin in my life. You're a true brother or sister. We never do that. And yet, when we understand why discipline is so necessary in the life of a believer, what we are able to do is, after we've been disciplined, kind of pause and maybe let a few little time go by, and then we look back at it and go, and I am so thankful you intervened. I mean, how many of us, seriously, if we're going to be honest, look back to our childhood and go, I am so grateful my parents intervened. At the time, boy, I fought it. I thought it was such a horrible idea. I was like, how dare you restrict me from enjoying life? Little did you know that your parents were protecting you, and that discipline was good. And if you have kids now, you probably do some of the same things, and your kids are doing the exact same thing to you that you did to your parents. Why don't you let me live life? Because I care about you and I love you, and your idea of living life is reckless and dangerous. And so you are forced to discipline. And when God disciplines us, there is great value in that. And Clayton talked about this, I really hope that you guys get a chance, if you didn't get to hear it, but go back and listen to it. Fantastic sermon on discipline and the benefits of discipline. It's one of the things that we really don't look toward or ever want to think about, but it is such a vital part of our life as believers. God will discipline you. The church will discipline you. Believers will discipline you, and you will do the same to other believers. And it is a vital part of the growth that we have when done right. Let me change that. When done properly, the purpose of discipline is to lead someone to repentance and then lead people to reconciliation. That's why we discipline. It's not just to do it. I don't discipline my kids because I like to. My hope is that it will lead them to seeing this behavior is not godly, and therefore I repent, and then hopefully they will come to me and we can reconcile. That's the idea behind it. Some of my kids, it takes them longer to reconcile than others. Joel's the best. I'm being serious. He is the perfect example. Man, when I get on him, he gets mad. I mean, you could just see it in his face. He doesn't want to talk. It's not even 10 minutes later, he's back and he's like, hugs and I love you and I'm sorry. The best. Seriously. And I'm not just saying that because he's looking at him. He's got his all red face now. Now you know what he's going to say to me? I'm dead serious. Later on he's going to be like, why'd you use me as an example in the sermon? Technically, I didn't pray yet, so we're not in the sermon. All right. So then, last week we talked about running the race of faith with style, right? But in doing that, we need to pursue two things. Peace and holiness, thank you. Peace and holiness. But the way that we do that is we need to make sure that we are watching, we are aware of the pitfalls that are in our path. And I talked about a good racer, what he does before he runs a race, is he surveys the course. He wants to see where the dangerous areas are, where are the hills, where is there a set of leaves and a giant hole in there that he needs to run around instead of running through. All those things that good runners, good racers do is they check out the course to see where the dangerous areas are. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to stumble. And Scripture was very clear last week when it said we don't want to stumble. We don't want to become bitter. We don't want to be sexually immoral. And we don't want to be profane or unholy. And Esau was used as an example of someone who profaned what was holy. His birthright, he traded for a meal. He did not value what God honored. And that made him unholy. And now this week, and we also spoke about last week the importance of not only running the race with style and making sure that our course is clear of pitfalls, but our responsibility as believers is to make sure that those running with us don't fall into the pitfall. They don't stumble. They don't become sexually immoral. For us to run the race successfully, we do it together. And so if I'm running the race, and I'm running it, of course, with style, and I look to my right and I see one of my fellow brothers and sisters stumbling along the way, I don't speed up. And I don't slow down, let them fall and hop over them. But instead I run alongside of them and I carry them through. Because I know there's going to be a point where I stumble. And I'm hoping that people running the race with me are going to come alongside of me and carry me through that time, not leave me fall. And now this week, we're going to get a very interesting dose of encouragement. This passage that we're going to come into today is Hebrews 12:18 through 29. It is half warning and half encouragement. It is half encouragement, half warning. And it's a very interesting passage, the way that the author kind of puts this into this specific place. And I'm hoping that you guys see just the magnificent aspect of what this passage is telling us. It is literally the author telling us, listen to the voice. And he's talking about God's voice. And it's something that we need to do today. We need to think about. And it's presented to us in the sense of a comparison between two mountains. So we're going to see two mountains, and the author is telling us, listen to the voice from the mountain. And so we're going to be given a warning to listen to that voice. Heed the voice of him who speaks. And so today I want you guys to think about two questions as we're working through this text. The first is, do we appreciate the significance of the mountain to which we have come from? And are we heeding the voice of the mountain that we are at? So let's pray and see where the Spirit leads us. Father God, we're so grateful to be here, to be able to gather and worship. Help us to see your beauty in all things. Help us to hear your voice. Help us to know that it's really you. So, Father, I ask that during this time, the Spirit opens our hearts and minds, and we ask for you to help us to hear you. Father, make us more like Christ. In his name we pray. Amen. All right. So first of all, we're going to take this in a couple chunks. Let's start with verses 18 through 21. The author writes or speaks at this time, "For you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages would be spoken to them. For they could not endure the order that was given. If even a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear." All right, so again, remember this in context of what we just covered. Author encourages us to run this race of faith, setting aside sin. Then he speaks of discipline and the importance and the beauty, the goodness of discipline. Then he turns it again and he says, but when you're running this race, run it with style and watch out for your brother and sister. Then he gets into this thing about this mountain, which is very interesting. So he says, for you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest. Okay, he's already setting up the contrast. He's saying, okay, you guys who are this, believers, running the race of faith, running it with style, helping one another out, you haven't come to this mountain. This isn't the mountain that you're at. This is in fact Mount Sinai that he's referring to. If we look back to Exodus 19, verses 12 through 29, this is the place that Moses led the Israelites out of bondage from the Egyptians, out of slavery, and brings them to this mountain, Mount Sinai. And it says this in Exodus, and you shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up into the mountain or touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot. Okay. God was saying that this mountain is so off limits. If you touch it, we got to kill him. You don't have a choice. If someone touches this mountain, you got to kill him. But you can't kill him with your hands, because you can't touch this guy now. You got to stone him. All right? God was saying that the mountain is off limits. Someone touches it, he's dead, but you can't kill him. You got to stone him. Whether a beast or man, even if an animal, you let your little doggy, who you love, scamper around and he touches the mountain, it's got to be put down. He shall not live. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and consecrated the people, and they washed their garments. And he said to the people, be ready for the third day, do not go near a woman. On the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightning, and a thick cloud on the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. So here we have this mountain speaking. Mount Sinai was a place where God's voice was heard. And God had very specific instructions about this mountain. When you approach it, do it this way. Stand here. Now remember, these are the people that God had just brought out of slavery. He had just taken them out of bondage, brought them through the wilderness to Mount Sinai. And God says, you cannot approach this mountain. There are specific rules for how you engage with me. Now, another interesting thing about this mountain is that it shook, it trembled, smoke came out of it. It was almost like a volcano. And when it's described in Deuteronomy, in Exodus 20:18, it says, now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes and the lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off. God says, come to this mountain. This is where I am going to be. The mountain shakes, trembles, lightning, smoke, fire. People were a little afraid. They were very, very afraid. They literally trembled as they stood there. And it was so frightening that Moses himself was frightened. Moses, the one that God has looked after since birth, chose specifically for this job of delivering his people. Moses, who encountered God, right, more than once. Moses was afraid. And the author is telling us, for you have not come to what may be touched. The author is clearly saying the mountain that you get access to isn't this one. It is not Mount Sinai. You have a different mountain. Verse 22, back in Hebrews, it says, "But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel." Now I want you guys to start contrasting the two. On one hand, you have Mount Zion. Don't approach it. Don't touch it. You touch it, you die. It trembles. It shakes. Smoke. Fire. The author's telling us, you don't have Mount Sinai. You have this other mountain, Mount Zion. Let me tell you about this one. Because you know about Sinai, right? You touch it, you die. It smokes, trembles. People are afraid. Moses himself is afraid. But let me tell you about Zion. Zion was originally the stronghold of the Jebusites. That is, until it became Jerusalem, the city of David. In 2 Samuel 5, 6, and 10, it says, "And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who said to David, 'You will not come in here, but the blind and lame will ward you off,' thinking, 'David cannot come in here.' Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is, the city of David. And David said on that day, 'Whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him get up the water shaft to attack the lame and the blind, who are hated by David's soul. Therefore it is said, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house.' And David lived in the stronghold and called it the city of David. And David built the city all around from the Milio inward. And David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him." The author is saying, okay, we have these two mountains. Sinai, do not touch, brings death. It is a place of fear. But then we have this mountain, Zion. It is the city of Jerusalem. It is referenced that way in Psalm 48 and Psalm 84 and Amos 6:1. And it's also the heavenly Jerusalem where God dwells. In Isaiah 28, Psalm 2, Revelation 14, we're told that God lives in this heavenly Jerusalem, Mount Zion. But whereas in Mount Sinai we were told, do not approach, Mount Zion, we're encouraged to draw close to it. The author's telling us, do you see the difference between these two places? Mount Zion was do not touch. Mount Sinai was do not touch. Zion was approach, come close. This you want. This you don't want. And the author's saying, pursue peace. Pursue holiness. Run toward Zion. Allow Zion to draw you near to it. This Zion is the city of the living God. It's the heavenly city that Abraham longed for. Remember when we went through that passage in Hebrews 11, the Hebrews Hall of Faith? And we talked about all those people that had great and amazing faith in spite of their circumstances. This is what they were looking toward. They were looking toward Mount Zion. And the author's telling us, you have it. You have access to it. And he's describing it. He's saying, oh, it is the place where God dwells. It's the heavenly city that we are seeing when we read Revelation. That city that's being made and built and created. That is where the Lord dwells. That is our eternal home. And when you come to Christ, when you enter the covenant with Christ, you become a permanent citizen of that city. And the author is saying, you get to come here. It's not Sinai. You don't have to be afraid. And then he goes into describing it and talking about just how amazing it's going to be. Remember, he just had said, Sinai was the place you touch and you die. But listen to Zion. It's going to have an innumerable company of angels. This multitude of angels that are going to be worshiping, that are going to be ministering, that are going to be caring for. All in one place. Remember back in Hebrews 1, verse 14, it said, when they're talking about the angels, it says, are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation? You who will inherit salvation will be ministered to by this innumerable number of angels. Like that's part one of what this city is going to be like. What part one of what Zion is going to be. It's going to be comprised of this assembly of all who have inherited salvation, who are the church, the firstborn, registered in heaven. The church in the universal sense comprised of all the saints. It's like, okay, this is Zion. Angels that you can't even count. And their purpose is to minister to those who inherit salvation. And those who have inherited salvation, that's the church. They're going to be there. So far, this is the picture we have of this Zion. Angels. Numbers that we can't even count. Ministering to the church. Those who have inherited salvation. The firstborn who have special privileges because of their birthright. There is a book of life. And the names are written in them. And they say, the author goes on and says, it is that place, the city of the living God, heavenly Jerusalem, innumerable angels in festal gathering. Could you even imagine the singing? Can you imagine what worship would be like? Angels, the church, singing together, praising God. The assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven. And God, the judge of all. In Genesis 18, it says, far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? It is a reminder to us that God is just. God is a good judge. And I know it's going to sound odd, but when God judges, it will be good. It will truly be good because that is who God is. He cannot judge unjustly. And so this is the place that we're going to be, where justice is always, always practiced. There will be no oppression. There will be no slavery. God will be there, the judge of all. And it is God that we must heed the voice of. And also in Zion, we are going to see the spirits of righteousness made perfect. It's a reference to the Old Testament saints that we saw in Hebrews 11:39. And all of these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. But remember that we were made perfect. We were made perfect by the sacrifice of the true high priest, Jesus himself. You know what else makes Zion absolutely amazing? Jesus is there. Tells us, to all the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant. Jesus himself, the true high priest, the true sacrifice, will also be in Mount Zion. He is, of course, the mediator of the better covenant. We saw that in Hebrews 8:6. But as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is more excellent than the old, as the covenant he mediates is better, since it is enacted on better promises. Jesus, the mediator, will be there. Jesus, the high priest, will be there. Jesus, the perfect sacrifice, will be there. And then what's interesting, the author throws this in. He says, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. The blood of Abel. What a strange... And we've seen this throughout Hebrews. It's this book of contrasts. This is good. Jesus is way better. This is good. Jesus is way better. Do you remember when Abel brought his sacrifice to God? And it was a sacrifice of an animal. And there was blood that was sprinkled. And God was pleased with it. The author's going back to saying, remember that when God was pleased? Oh, when Jesus' blood was sprinkled. Now that was pleasing to God. That was a sacrifice that appeased everything. That was something that was truly good. The blood of Christ, in comparison to Abel's offering that God said pleased him, doesn't even register in comparison. Jesus' sacrifice was that much greater. Jesus' sacrifice was that much more fulfilling. In Hebrews chapter 10, verse 11, it says, and every priest stands daily at his service, offering repeatedly the same sacrifice which can never take away sins. But when Christ had offered for all time a single sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God, waiting from that time until his enemies should be made a footstool for his feet. For by a single offering he has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified. Remember, God said Abel's sacrifice was good. Jesus' sacrifice was infinitely greater. And the author wants to make sure everyone knows that this city, Zion, the heavenly Jerusalem, the place where God dwells, the place where an innumerable amount of angels will be there, having a party, celebrating, where all the church will gather, worshiping Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, will also be there. And it will be infinitely better because of that. Now, the way that the author presented this, I thought, think of how interesting it is if we look at it from the other way. If we go backwards instead, or in reverse. We see that coming to Christ, his blood redeems us, which is much more than what Abel could do. It was much more pleasing to God than what Abel offered. And we are able to draw near to Zion. We get an invitation to the heavenly city. And it is not like Sinai. We do not have to fear. We do not have to tremble. Sinai is just like the rest of Hebrews. An example of something that's good. But Zion is something that's much better. Jesus is there. Just the way that Jesus fulfilled the role of high priest and made it better. Jesus fulfilled the role of sacrifice, made it better. Jesus fulfills Sinai by making Zion better. And so, this is where we hear the voice. This new mountain, Mount Zion. But we have to remember that we cannot reject the voice. We have to remember that we must heed the warning from the voice. Verse 25. See that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape if we reject him who warns us from heaven. You remember that the people at Mount Sinai did not escape. And the author's saying, that was earth. Okay? Yes, God was speaking to him. But that was earth. Let's put things into perspective. God spoke to them from a mountain. And he warned them. And they didn't listen. God is speaking now from heaven. Do you think that carries a little more weight? It should. Back in Hebrews 2:2 we saw that, for since the message declared by angels proved to be reliable, and every transgression or disobedience received a just retribution. The author warned us back then that there is a consequence to sin. Don't kid yourself. We think that when we sin, that there's an aspect that we get away with it. Right? If I sin and a lightning bolt doesn't strike me down, I must have fooled someone. I got away with it. I'm that slick. I'm that clever. The author goes, no. Every sin, every transgression or disobedience receives a just retribution. You're kidding yourself if you think that God, for some reason, overlooks your sin. You're kidding yourself if you think that you've gotten away with something. Sin doesn't work like that. God doesn't work like that. We just heard that God is a just God. He will punish. And he gives us a warning. And so the author wants to remind us again that, look, this is serious. There is a punishment for sin. And if you have forgotten, we can go back to Hebrews 3. This is verse 16. For who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not those who left Egypt led by Moses? And with whom was he provoked for 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. The voice from the mountain warned the people. There is retribution for sin. And the author warned us. I'm sorry. Keep going back. Back in Hebrews 2, verse 4. While God also bore witness by signs and wonders and various miracles and by gifts of the will distributed according to his will. Go back to verse 3 now. How shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation? It was declared at first by the Lord, and it was attested by those who heard and saw. Or how about this? If you guys can memorize a verse, or at least hold a passage close to your heart to show you that when God warns, it's serious. And I know for a fact that we have read this verse at least a dozen times in different sermons. Make this 13. Chapter 10, verse 29. How much worse punishment do you think will be deserved by the one who has trampled underfoot the Son of God? and has profaned the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified, and has outraged the Spirit of grace. That's about as serious as a warning as it comes. The author wants to make sure that the audience absolutely is aware that there is consequence for sin. He's saying, please listen to this warning. And he keeps taking them back to Mount Sinai. Do you remember what happened? The very same God who led them out of bondage and slavery told them to just be obedient. Follow him. And they refused. And God said, I'm left with no choice. You don't enter the promised land. Oh, and by the way, you guys are all going to die. And you don't enter my rest. You don't get salvation. And the author's going, please look back and remember them. See what was happening with them. I think it's really interesting that we forget that those of us who are presented the gospel, those of us who accept, receive the gospel, that our lives change. Everything changes. This is an example of what I mean in Luke 12:48. This is what Jesus says. Everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required. And from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. The life of a Christian requires much. Whatever you thought it was before you became a believer, it's much greater than that. The only difference is, it's real. You might have thought it was one way, but the truth of the matter is that it's a real thing. And Christ is saying, I demand everything of you. You were given salvation. How much more can someone be entrusted with? You were given citizenship to the city of Zion, where we will worship and praise God. God who is the judge of all. Oh, and by the way, me, the one who mediated on your behalf, who looked at the cross and embraced it as a thing of joy, because I would then redeem you and return to my rightful place. I require much of you. You don't belong to yourself. Do you get that? That you are no longer living to serve and please yourself. The biggest challenge we have in Christian life. You do not belong to yourself. If you call yourself a Christian, you belong to Jesus. Remember we talked about this last week? You have two choices. You are a slave to sin or a slave to righteousness. That's it. There's no middle ground. You can't pick both sides. You are one or the other. Now, if you're a slave to sin, go do whatever you want. You're free to do whatever you want. Live for your own enjoyment. But if you're a slave to righteousness, you lost your options. You lost choices. And you guys have heard me say this before. The moment you become a believer, every decision you make has to begin with, where is Jesus in this? Because you don't belong to yourself. And that ranges the entire spectrum of all of your life. You cannot say, I'm thinking about going to college in Hawaii without first asking, where is Jesus in my decision? I'm not saying going to college in Hawaii is wrong. It is if Jesus isn't in that. You better believe it's absolutely wrong. And that goes, like I said, that goes to across the board, everything about your life. Where is Christ in this decision? Now the problem is most of us take Christ out of it and say, where am I in this decision? What is going to be better for me? And Jesus is looking at you going, better for you? Let's start with salvation. There's nothing better than that, and I gave you that. So basically, everyone to whom much was given, of him much will be required. And from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more. How many of us literally go through our day going, oh Jesus, you have demanded so much of me. I just can't give any more. None of us. Do you want to know why? Because we're sitting there going, Q, you demand so much of me. I have very little time for anything else. And that's okay because that's what I want. I want to live for me. And Jesus goes, it doesn't work that way. The moment that I drew you to the new city, you became a citizen, a permanent citizen of this city. And by the way, I wrote the Constitution. I wrote the laws. I did all those things. And all of those things point toward one. To Jesus. All of those things point toward me. And he's saying, look, if it doesn't line up with this, you're being a slave to sin. And you can't be on both teams. You cannot. And the problem, I think, is that we spend most of our time jumping from one to the other when it fits. I'm going to pursue my career. Oh, wait a minute. I'm really pursuing me. I had a really interesting conversation with a good friend of mine who's planning a career change. And, guys, what did I ask him first? Where's Jesus in this? And you know what he said to me? He goes, you're kind of making me feel guilty because I've got to examine all my motives. Right? I mean, that's the truth of the matter. So he was telling me the story how he ran into a friend at IKEA. I just thought this was a great story. And this friend is currently thinking about buying a house. And his pastor met with him and started the whole conversation with, hey, I think buying a house is a great thing, but where's Jesus in your decision? Even in buying a house. And the guy was like, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, you have all these criterias. I need 5 bedrooms. I need a 4-car garage. I need a half-acre land. I need all these things. But where's Christ in this? And the two of them ended up having this conversation about that we made them feel guilty. Which I just thought was so fascinating. I'm like, wait a minute. I asked you where Jesus was in your decision, and you're telling me that I made you feel guilty? What did I do that would have made you feel guilty? I just asked you a simple question. In deciding to make a career change, did you ask the most important question of where is Jesus in this decision? I was, well, yeah, you made me feel guilty. I did. I'm like, not your conviction from Christ, because you've ignored him in this entire decision, and now suddenly you're being faced with realizing that I can't make any decision without Christ being at the center of it. Something as simple as changing careers. And again, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not a sinful act. He wasn't like, I'm going to become a drug dealer. That's not the career change he was thinking. Now that I would say is that's sinful, and you're probably going to go to jail. Because I'm going to turn you in for the reward. Because you know they give rewards. But the thing is he had this list, this criteria for why he was making a career change. None of those things were wrong. None of those things were sinful. But Jesus was never discussed in any of them. You know, like one of the things he did, this is the pastor conversation. He goes, well, I'd like to earn more money so I can give more to the church. Love that. My favorite reason of all time. This is my favorite reason of all time. It is what I call lottery mentality. You know why? Because people say, if I won the lottery, things would be so much different. No. You're wrong. You're absolutely incorrect. Simple rule of it's just very... Do you manage $30,000 well? No. You will not manage $30 million well. You will not. If you can't live, first of all, if you can't live in a budget, could you imagine having no budget? I mean, with $30,000, you kind of got an idea. Like you go, I can't buy a Mercedes. I can't buy a 4-bedroom house. There's certain parameters that are automatically set for you. Now imagine that guy with $30 million. The question now becomes, how many Mercedes can I buy? How many homes can I buy? And like I said, it's the lotto mentality to go, the reason why I want to change jobs so I can make more money so I can give more. If you're not giving now, you're not going to give if you have more. It's really simple. I know it sounds crazy. I know people are like, that's not true. You realize that as people increase in income, statistically it's proven, your percentage of giving goes down. It's a fact. Sorry. Because if you're making, like I said, if you're making $30,000 and you're giving $2,000, that's a chunk of your earnings, right? Like 8% or something. Well, if you're making $300,000 and you double that, you're double generous, and you're giving $4,000, that's like 0.1% of your giving. You see what I'm saying? Your giving didn't go up. It actually went down. And again, it's this idea of, so let me get back to my friend. I challenged him. I said, all of these things are good. Examine the motives for each one of these. And ask yourself each time, where is Jesus in this? Can Jesus bless you financially and give you much? Absolutely. Can Jesus provide you with a big house? Yes. A nice car? Of course. Money to go to dinners? Of course. All those things? Absolutely. My challenge to him was, well, what's your motivation for wanting those things? And this will kind of bring it back to the whole point of why I brought this up. One of the things he was telling me is he thinks he would take a job that paid him less money, but provided him with an office and a place where he could dress up every day, wear a suit. And I was very impressed, because that was very honest of him to say that he wanted the respect and credibility. And look, that's something that we all struggle with. And then I shared him, this was a very interesting story, and it was funny. Sahir brought over a couple friends. We had a cookout on Memorial Day. And one of her friends, I saw Sahir introduced Adib to him, and they did the, kid handshake. You know what I'm talking about? Like, yeah, my man. You know, that thing. Then this guy came up to me, and he introduced himself, and I said, hi, I'm Q. And he did the same handshake to me, and I was like, and then he goes, good to meet you, bro. And I just froze, and I'm like, what world do we live in that like a 20-year-old kid feels comfortable telling an adult at his house, as my guest, call me bro? You know what I mean? It's like, one time I remember going to Jewel, and the guy was putting a couple things in my bag. He was like a 16-year-old kid, and he goes, paper or plastic, chief? Chief? I'm like, chief? When did these rules kind of... Okay, nonetheless. So, I sat there, and this guy called me bro like more than one time. And I'm thinking to myself, and it reminded me of my friend's conversation, very much so. I'm thinking to myself, what about me communicates that it's okay to refer to me as bro if you're half my age? And it seriously bothered me. It really bothered me. And I'm going, maybe I need to start dressing different, because none of my friends growing up referred to my dad as bro or dude, none of those things. So I'm going, obviously I'm doing something wrong. What my dad wouldn't have had that, by the way. That kid would have gotten tossed in an instant. So I'm going, what is it about me that communicates that it's okay to call me bro? And I'm not lying. A day it bothered me. Like, because I'm even thinking, maybe I should start wearing khakis. Yeah. I'm thinking to myself, I got to do something different, because this is exuding, it's okay to call me bro if you're a 20-year-old friend of my daughter. I was troubled, seriously, until I realized that he did nothing wrong. Absolutely, this kid did nothing wrong. I had to really examine my heart and go, why did it bother me so much? And the truth is, and I'll confess it, is because I felt I wasn't given the respect that I deserved. But here's the problem with that. He treated me the same way he treated everyone else. He was very comfortable around me, and that should have been a compliment. That I didn't make him feel like someone he wasn't. That he could be himself around me. That was difficult for me to, kind of, I wanted the Mr. Mahmood or Pastor Q. So I wanted respect, title, authority. Something that I don't care for the rest of the time. But from him, I wanted it. And it was just very interesting that God revealed that to me about myself. That I need to humble myself and realize I'm not that special. I don't need to be treated any different by the 16-year-old bagger or a 20-year-old friend or whatever. I really don't need to be treated different. And that kid didn't owe me anything. And what did I communicate to him about the gospel? That I was offended? I did not run the race with style that day. I really didn't. There was no grace. Here's an opportunity of someone coming to my home that I could have shared the gospel with, and I was too hung up about me instead of Christ. And that's what happens when we take our eyes off Jesus. It becomes about ourselves. We begin to serve ourselves instead of Christ. Could you imagine? Who cares? He called me bro. What if I share the gospel with him and he got saved? Call me bro forever. Seriously, I think about that. Something so small completely derailed me off of the life of a Christian. Instead of being a slave to righteousness, I was a slave to sin because I was just concerned about my ego. And here was a person, like I said, who came to my house. I had the upper hand. He was in my territory. Do you know what I mean? We weren't on neutral ground. I wasn't at his place. He came to my house. He knows that I'm a pastor. He knows that we go to church. The whole Christian life thing. And I was so caught up that he didn't give me the respect that I thought I deserved. That I didn't give Jesus the respect he deserved. And so who much is entrusted with, the more is demanded. Let me get back to this and try to speed through the rest. So we were getting this comparison between these two mountains, and we're being shown that Mount Zion is the place that we want. It's the place that we've been offered. But there is still a voice that speaks from this mountain. And we have to heed that voice. We have to heed the warnings. Verse 26 says, "At that time, his voice shook the earth. But now he has promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens." This phrase, "yet once more," indicates the removal of the things that are shaken. That is, things that have been made, in order that the things that cannot be shaken may remain. When God spoke at Mount Sinai, back in Exodus, the mountain shook. It trembled. The earth trembled. And the author is saying, you know how we do this comparison all the time? Well, let me get back to the comparison. God is going to speak again, and on that day, the earth will shake, and so will heaven. Because Hebrews all about, this was good, this is better. It says, that time we just shook the earth. This time God's going to shake the earth and heaven. And when he does that, things that are made are going to be shaken and broken. Everything that we have made will be broken. Now, picture this. Imagine looking at the skylines of all the great cities. And God saying, there's still another voice that you're going to hear. And when that one comes, everything's coming down. Remember how much in awe we were when the World Trade Centers came down? How we were like, how could that happen? And I don't even care if you believe it was a plane or the government put bombs. It doesn't make a difference. Two of the most massive structures on Earth came down. Imagine cities coming down. Imagine Chicago, New York, LA. I even think there's a high-rise in Oklahoma City. Imagine, there's one, right? There is, really, right?
We got one.
I know. It's the funniest thing when they show the picture of the stadium. There's a high-rise right there, one. You're like, where's the rest of the skyline? Stadium. All right. But imagine, it's every city. You imagine the sense of awe that you had when you were watching the TV and watching the two buildings come down. The author of Hebrews is saying, hey, you know what's going to happen is God is going to speak again, and when it happens, not only will the earth shake, heaven will shake. And not only that, everything that is made is going to be shaken and brought down. Removed, so to speak. Now look, if that voice, if that doesn't make you fearful, I don't know how much more to convey it to you. The author is saying, look, he shook a mountain. Remember I told you, good, better? He's going to shake everything. Not just a mountain. You know when there's a mountain, a volcano starts to erupt, or, you know, you see pictures on the news, man, those people are hauling out of that area, right? People are getting into cars, they're driving. Like my favorite is Hawaii. Where are you going? The whole thing is a volcano. Well, all right, go to the coast, it's closer. Like hot lava can't reach you by water, right? You know, if I stand in the water, you ever boil water? Now try 2,000 degree rocks. Yeah. But when it happens in Washington, or when a volcano tremors someplace, people go. They're like, we got to leave. Just, you see cars everywhere, people running if they don't have cars. Like, how far can you run? And now the author's saying, not just the mountain, the entire world is going to shake. Heaven is going to shake. And whatever has been made will be shaken. Are you going to listen now? It's because the people at Sinai sure didn't listen. But they should have. And then we're told, we are going to be given a kingdom that cannot be shaken. In verse 28 it says, therefore let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe. Excuse me. One day everything that is made will perish, will go away. All the great things that we've built to impress ourselves, to impress the world, will be gone. We are going to be given a kingdom that will never perish, that cannot be shaken. And I think this is really cool. In the text it says, therefore let us be grateful for receiving, present tense. We are getting that now. A kingdom is being built for us now that cannot be shaken. The kingdom, it's very interesting. It's present, perfect, which means it is happening now and to the end. We are getting a kingdom now and in the future. We are in the kingdom, and yet we will enter the kingdom. This kingdom was inaugurated when Jesus ascended, which, by the way, is today, Ascension Sunday. When Jesus ascended to sit at God's right hand on David's throne, that's when the kingdom began. And when Jesus returns, the kingdom will be fulfilled and it will be delivered to us. It's a kingdom that will never be destroyed. It will stand forever. There is none like it, and it has no end. If someone can build a kingdom like that, shouldn't we listen to their voice? And then the passage ends with this, verse 29. For our God is a consuming fire. And that's one of the things I love about the book of Hebrews, is that the author doesn't pull punches. He doesn't tell you, hey, everything is nice and wonderful. But he always keeps things in perspective. He talks about, hey, look, Sinai, God spoke, the people didn't listen, this was the consequence. But we have this beautiful thing, Zion. It's going to be wonderful and amazing. Oh, and by the way, everything that you guys built is going to be destroyed. But. What was the last part? Be grateful. You're getting this kingdom. You see what I'm saying? He's like going up and down. Warning, compliment, warning, compliment, warning, compliment. And then it ends with this. Hey, therefore let us be grateful. We're receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe. Yes, finally, we're ending strong on a good, positive note. For our God is a consuming fire. Back to a dose of reality. Putting us into our place. Remembering who we are in light of who God is. Remember that this God that he's referring to is the same one that we read in Hebrews 10:27. It says, but a fearful expectation of judgment and a fury of fire will consume the adversaries. Don't play with God. It's the same one that we saw. It's the same God that we saw and read about in 10:30 through 31. For we know him who said, vengeance is mine, I will repay. And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Don't mess with God. Jesus said this in Matthew 10. Jesus, our friend, our brother, the kind one, right? Right? God is the angry father. Jesus is our buddy, our brother. Right? Isn't that how we always look at Jesus? And then he says something like this. Chapter 10, verse 28. Do not fear those who will kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and the body in hell. Don't mess with my Father. That's what Jesus is saying there. Don't mess with him. I've known him a lot longer than you guys have. Do not take him lightly. Do not play around. So we see that while this message was called, the voice from the mountain, heeding the warning from the voice, God has spoken from the beginning of time. He spoke in creation. He spoke creation into existence. He has spoken through his Son. He has spoken from Mount Zion, the heavenly city. And he's told us that we are to have an obedient faith in Christ. That we will enjoy the fellowship of angels, the redeemed in heaven and on earth, and the fellowship of Christ himself. We will enjoy a new and better covenant based upon the sacrifice of Christ's blood. But all the good always comes with a warning. We are given such wonderful blessings and responsibilities. Do not neglect your salvation. Do not refuse the voice that speaks from the mountain. Instead, listen to the words of Hebrews 12:28. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, and thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and with awe. And it is because of that, it is because of what Zion is versus what Sinai was, our relationship with God has changed. Because of the better sacrifice, because of the true high priest, because of the better covenant, we have a different relationship with God. Jesus has become the mediator for us on our behalf and provides us with a relationship as children to God. And as children, we get to participate in the table. We get to come forward and participate in communion.